Hi, I'm Joseph Coretta, and welcome to my storybook. Today, this is the part 5 of this book, and today I'm going to be reading Coretta Scott King. I will continue to read this book. This time, it's Chapter 7. Chapter 7, Birmingham. In March 1962, Coretta was one of a group of 50 American women who traveled to Greenville, Switzerland, in an effort to establish an international ban on the testing of all atomic weapons. The trip was sponsored by the Women's Strike for Peace, and Coretta was honored when she received an invitation to go. Coretta and three other black women were part of the delegation, which meant women from scattered Britain, the USSR, and Australia. On a plane to Greenville, Coretta found her following delegates to be very stable, intelligent, and level-handed. She was very much at home in the company of so many bright and popularly attended women. But the trip to Geneva proved disappointing. The American women's delegation was brushed off by Walter Dean, the United States representative at the conference. Coretta wrote years later that she felt that Dean considered the delegation as a group headed toward women, bringing down a serious organization of concerned critics. The meeting ended abruptly when the women were coldly advised by Dean to consult the Soviet government. The women did just that. The Soviets discussed nuclear testing with them in an open mail, and even held at reception to honor them. Although impressed by the cordial treatment the women receiving from the Soviets, Coretta realized that the Russians were masters of the art of propaganda, and would, as a matter of course, treat them well to elect a positive response. But once back on the plane to the United States, Coretta still couldn't help but wonder why the Americans had resisted the, the delegation's efforts to discuss the issues of nuclear testing, the nonviolent protest movement struggling against the increments of racism. But Coretta also saw sexism as an undeniable and stifling injustice. In Atlanta, Martin was working hard to strengthen the SCLC's leadership of a nonviolent movement. He also wanted to launch the voter registration campaign, which had taken a back seat to his troubles with the Sutton legal system. Throughout most of the pursuit year, the SCLC had measures to raise as much as $20,000 through a celebrity benefit concert at Conway's Hall, organized in part by Miller Angelina, writers, artists, actors, and musicians, both black and white, such as Angelina, Leon Bernstein, and Harry Belafonte, shared their talents to raise money for the nonviolent movement. Some celebrities even made personal donations to the SCLC and the SNCC. These funds allowed the SCLC to hire new staff members to help Morton with the movement. With ability, and his family also moved from Montgomery to Atlanta in order to be closer to the SCLC's headquarters. White T. Walker, a black minister from Virginia, who fought to integrate public factories in cities throughout that state, was held to be the SCLC's executive director and one of the main headquarters. Andrew Lawn, another black minister, came to work for the SCLC as a collaboration with Martin to increase black voters' registration in the South. Specter Clark and Dorothy Cotton also joined the ranks. Clark handled the SCLC's citizenship education program while schooling certain blacks in their constitutional rights, voting procedures, and basic literacy. Clark was also responsible for training the young adults who worked as teachers in the program. Carter was responsible for recuperating college students and non activities to participate. By this time, Alan Baker was devoting most of her agencies to the SNCC. She would eventually lead the SCLC to fight racial discrimination on her own. This was partly because Baker found it difficult to assess her leadership in an organization headed by men. Although the SCLC fought against racism, historians note that Baker felt she inclusion in a intervention within the organization. Baker greatly admired Coretta for her dedication to the civil rights struggle. Before she left the SCLC, she gave Coretta these words of advice. You need to be the model to counselors of men. We have a lot to say. Baker's is hesitant was a perfect match for the SNCC and SCLC's student division. The non-black members were the engine behind the SCLC's voter registration campaign that began in Albury, Georgia, in the summer of 1961 under the leadership of Charles Sherwood, SNCC's field secretary, and a lone man named Condell Reagan in a blink of an eye. The voter registration campaign blindsided into a sit-in protest against segregation in Alabama. Unfortunately, the mass sit-in failed. That will. Morton and Alberta traveled to Albany to help the young people negotiate with city officials and police. The two leaders were jailed repeatedly, but were always released before their death like could propose public sympathy. Black leaders and community-based civil rights groups were then launching out attempts to reach an agreement with the city. Martin tried several times to contact President Kennedy to see whether the federal government would intervene in the negotiations with city officials, but the White House never responded. After spending a little working in Alabama, Martin returned to Atlanta. The lone members of the S of the SNWC were bitter and disappointed. Martin, too, was frustrated that he could not reach the city's residents to racial integration, and the Kennedy administration's silence during the live-long crisis was also unsettling. Meanwhile, Lord Prescott, and Bella's chief of police solemnly claimed victory. Alabama is disintegrated as ever. Prescott boasted the nonviolent movement was 7 years old. Martin now realized that racism, embodied as it was in the hearts and minds of many Americans, would be far more difficult to overcome than ever had ever even he had in Mayville, just as Coretta and her women colleagues were not taken seriously by the U.S. government in Geneva, it seems that Martin, the SCLC, SNCC, and the entire nonviolent civil rights movement were being dismissed by certain authorities and the federal government. But Martin and Coretta would not give up. They continued the struggle and grew wiser in the process. A meeting with President John F. Kennedy and authorities General Robert Kennedy was at the top of the SCLC's agenda for 1963. In January, Martin and Billy and Fred Shuttlesworth met with the Kennedys to discuss the need for the new Civil Rights Bill. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 had not provided as a defense as the SCLC had hoped. Blacks throughout the South continued to suffer. President Kennedy listened but made no promise. The SCLC went forward with a plan to desecrate a city that was known as a bedrock of white supremacy, Birmingham, Alabama. The city's achievement behavior of blacks was legendary, hospitality ties to immigrant power by compromise throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. Birmingham witnessed more than 50 cross bombings, along with more than 50 racial movement motivated bombings. Eugene Bull Corner, the city's commissioner of public safety, was known as an anti-racist. He used the police to terrorize blacks. Even Alabama Governor George Wallace proclaimed proudly that he would do everything in his power to keep the races separate and equal, so blacks in Birmingham could not appeal to the state governor for help. If Martin and his followers could challenge the racist city and the state government authorities and reveal Birmingham's sins to the nation, the nonviolent movement might gain solely new momentum. The SCLC began organizing in Birmingham early in the year. Coretta was accepted the king's fourth child and was important for due date. Martin was busy traveling, but he made it back to Atlanta in time to take Coretta to the hospital on March 28, 1963. Balance abilities, the king's second daughter and last child, was born. Martin was off Birmingham the next day. On April the 3rd, Martin issued a challenge to the city. He declared the start of the mass protest movement to disagree with all of the city's public factories and transformation sectors and to urge local retail stores to help black authorities help black employees. Martin spoke at black shelters around Birmingham, encouraging people to join the sit-ins and marches. African Americans, both young and old, hailed the call. People who were willing to protest were trained in nonviolent methods of protecting themselves from police brutality. They were also assured that the SCLC would help pay their bails if they were arrested, so they could return to the streets to demonstrate. Protests took place at lunch courtrooms and informed the department stores. During the first 3 days of the protest, more than 300 people were arrested. The city eventually got an injunction from the state court forbidding protest demonstrations. The court also ruled that only cash could be accepted as payment for bail. This was a big problem for the protesters because the SCLC's cash revolts were running low. Morton and other SCLC leaders knew they couldn't back down now. They decided to violate the injunction with a march to the City Hall on Good Friday, April 12, 1963. Martin and Abeli vowed to demonstrate together and risk being arrested and missing their Eastern sermons. Just as they had anticipated, each was arrested and held in solitary confinement in the Birmingham jail. Coretta was the funeral warrant in Atlanta for Wolford Martin, but it didn't come. Martin was jailed so often that phone calls from prison had become warranted. This time, however, Coretta knew something was wrong. White T. Walker tried to call Martin at the jail, but he couldn't get through. Lawyers were also barred from seeing Martin on ability. Neither man was allowed to communicate with anyone. By Easter Sunday, Coretta was so concerned for their welfare that she called the White House. The president was not available. While Authority General Robert Kennedy returned Coretta's call, she told him that the family had not heard from Martin in 3 days and asked if the president could find out about her husband's condition. The Authority General promised to inquire about Martin. Robert Kennedy was Bull Cardinal's reputation for racist. He knew that finding out about Martin and ability was not going to be easy. On Monday, President Kennedy called Coretta to reassure her. He told her that he had spoken to city officials city and police officials in Birmingham. The husband will be calling you smoothly, the president said confidently. To Coretta's great relief, Martin called home 15 minutes later. He was really unharmed. Coretta told him of his conversation with the president. So that's why everybody is certainly being so politic, Martin said, really. But he also intimated that Coretta should instruct other SCLC leaders to leak the story of Kennedy's involvement to the press. To contract White T. Walker in middle of a lawsuit shortly thereafter. Martin and Ability will spend 8 days in prison. But after the SCLC spurred the war that President Kennedy had called Coretta, the nation paid attention to Birmingham and to the nonviolent movement. As soon as Martin and Ability were released on April 20th, they met with other SCLC leaders at the organization's Birmingham headquarters. The leaders expressed concern that the protest had come to a halt while Martin and Ability were in jail. To sustain public interest, the SCLC decided to recuperate school children for the protest. Martin had reservations about lesbian children in the movement, but he also knew that their life and the monitors would dump up properties support for the battle against Birmingham's racists. On May the 2nd, more than 1,000 children and teenagers marched from Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church into town. Bull Coroner made over 900 arrests. The next day, Bull Boots joined the march. This time, Coroner ordered his men to blast the children with high-pressure fire hose and to unleash their dogs. Children were soaking with water, bleeding from dog bites, and battling for police clubs. A scuffle broke out between outraged black Oblocks and the police. When he saw the riot on television and the newspapers, President Kennedy quickly dispatched a negotiation named Book Marshal to Birmingham to mediate between the SCLC and white business and civil leaders. By May 10th, an agreement had been reached. The city promised to desegregate public places such as stores and parks. Retailers also agreed to integrate their lunch communal counters and to hire black employees. Furthermore, black and white leaders were to meet regularly to continue resolving their differences. Tired and relieved, Martin flew home to be with his wife and children. The violence against the children of Birmingham had deeply shaken him and Coretta. Of course, that was not the end of it. She later wrote the violence in Birmingham, and some of the fresh chaos touches the King family personality. On May the 10th, Martin's brother, A.D. King, called Atlanta to report that his home in Birmingham had been fired on. A.D. had helped the SCLC organize several protests in the city. He and his wife and family were not harmed, and he had tried to stem the tide of anger waters as he stood in the warmth of his house. The Birmingham office where Martin had just stayed was also bombed. The rioting that broke out after the bombings were an expression of black outrages. People were fed up with the quietly racist terror tactics of Birmingham's white hate groups. Martin flew back to the city to help quell the chaos. Meanwhile, President Kennedy made a national television speech and denounced the violence. He also sent federal troops to the city to restore order. Despite the destruction and turmoil following the negotiations in Birmingham, the SCLC could still claim a real victory against the evil of racist segregation. Events in Birmingham forced the federal government, which had been ordered of black activities, to be pleased to re-examine its position on the matter. On June 11, 1963, President Kennedy held a press conference and announced that his intentions to support a civil rights bill outlawing racist segregation in all public factories. The bill will give the government the right to sue businesses and organizations that refuse to integrate. The civil rights bill will reinforce the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus the Brown v. Board of Education and pressure states to fully integrate public education systems. In the wake of the Birmingham events, communities across the South slowly began to organize marches and sit-ins for freedom and justice. The nonviolent movement for civil rights was in full swing. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has succeeded in recent Americans' heart injustices. On August 28, 1963, the spark that integrated in Birmingham shone brightly in the nation's capital. Nearly 250,000 people, black, white, Native American, Latino, Isa, long, old, rich, and poor, marched from the Washington movement to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was a mass call for justice for all American people, regardless of race, sex, creed, or economic status. It was the largest peaceful mass demonstration in the history of the United States, and Martin was to speak, dripping with sweat from the intense heart. The marchers listened as Martin fulfilled the air. He proudly stood before a sea of face and proclaimed his vision for the better day and a great nation. Coretta sat behind her husband, and on the speaker's platform, saying that he had abandoned his prepared speech, and that his words was inspired by God. She beamed with pride. Several years later, Coretta had begun recording of her husband's church, sermons, and speeches. She also clipped newspaper articles about his activities and kept a collection of his personal writings about his involvement for the development of peace and social justice. Somehow, Coretta knew that this speech added up to channel lightly Martin's most cherished vision and dream would be the most meaningful of his life. His words were simple and profound. I had a dream that my 4 little children one day will live in a nation when they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I had a dream today. As Martin left the platform, applause and cheers filled the air. Martin and Coretta left the stage on and on as security guards rushed to protect them from the crush of the crowd. That will be the end of the chapter 7 in this Coretta Scott King. Now, the part 6 will be tomorrow. We'll be reading chapter 8, called What Are You Afraid of? That will be the end of this book. Part 6 will be tomorrow. Till then, I'm Joseph Crudup.